My name is Brendan McGinty, and I'm a cinematographer. From my earliest memories, there were always cameras, lenses, film. I grew up in a family where both of my parents were stills photographers. So they had me working in a darkroom, essentially, from a very, very young age, printing contact sheets, doing prints for them. But I always slightly took for granted this photographic facility that I just acquired through my family, and I never really thought of it as a vocation. It was only later, when I went to university, that I suddenly became interested in film, and suddenly realized that this photographic skill that I had narrative potential. I could tell stories with it. I didn't understand at that moment there was such a thing as a cinematographer. I thought directors did everything, and I probably thought I wanted to be a director. But I can specifically remember the day I decided to make films, which was I went to see David Lynch's Blue Velvet on the day that it came out. And it was electrifying. I was speechless as I left the cinema. And I came out of the cinema, went straight to the ticket office, bought another ticket and went back in and watched it again. And it was transformative. That was specifically the moment where I realized I want to make films. I grew up all over the world, but ended up for secondary school and university in South Africa, in Johannesburg. And I went to Johannesburg's, probably the biggest university there, which is Wits, University of the Witwatersrand. The degree I did was a generic arts degree. And film only came a bit later. I began doing history of art, English, philosophy, and film. I fell in love with film sort of midway through that and tried to change the course of my degree. I ended up writing a dissertation about Stanley Kubrick's films. And the only way it could be marked, which is probably very much in keeping with how I work now, was it was quite interdisciplinary. So it had to be marked by the film department, the English department, and the philosophy department. And I hope I've carried this sort of slightly eclectic approach with me into the work that I do now. But I also remember the day that Stanley Kubrick died. By this time, I was working as a cinematographer in London. And, I was quite moved by his death and the inspiration I'd drawn from his films as an academic. So as an academic, I'd pored over his films and written this big sort of MA dissertation on his films and what they meant. But it was when he died, I felt moved because I then understood technically some of his achievements, as in I was by then someone who made films. I was a working cinematographer. So I felt quite moved, and I wrote this letter to Sight and Sound, which I used to read all the time, which, I was very flattered, and they published, where I spoke about Kubrick in terms of my love for him, in terms of ideas and philosophy, and then my rediscovery of him through the technique. This is a man who invented Steadicam, invented all sorts of things that are now sort of taken for granted. Stanley Kubrick, very much part of my education as well. So when I arrived in London in the mid-90s, I knew I wanted to make films, but didn't know anyone. I had no contacts at all. And this is kind of pre-internet, so very, very hard to network with anyone at this point. And I just begin hustling. I begin networking as much as I can, hanging out with film people, any sort of event where there were film people at, I'd be like, try to get in there. And I eventually lied my way onto an indie feature film, and I definitely don't recommend this, but I lied my way on to being a gaffer for an independent feature film. It's a very dangerous lie, that one. I did manage to insist that I had a professionally trained spark with me, who probably saved some lives. But there was a big gap in my knowledge. I was quite an experienced photographer, stills photographer, but I knew nothing about lighting. Lighting is very, very different in the film world, in the motion world. So that was like a university for me. I was just watching and learning. And we did day for night. We did green screen. We were shooting in a studio. We were shooting on location. We did all these things. And I was just absorbing and learning and the names of things and hustling. I started shooting like music videos on every weekend, short films on every other weekend. It was just this, the combination of being on a feature film and learning so much by doing. This is not an academic pursuit. This is about doing and the experience of doing. And then just threw myself into music video after short film. There was nothing I would say no to. It was just that. You start meeting people, The network thing is big. I met directors then that I still work with now. So it's just getting out there doing stuff. So when I started out, I was a stills photographer who used to shoot a lot of available life stuff, quite in the documentary world. I loved going into the real world, seeing how light fell on things, taking pictures of people or places or objects. And then I fell in love with film. And in my head, I had it that film was this very sort of theatrical and everything was lit and very considered camera move. So I guess my early work had a more theatrical aspect, as in I was trying very hard to mimic this cinema as I perceived it in my head. But to pay the bills, I was doing a lot of documentary work, which was handheld, available light. And I got to be honest, initially available light I found very, very hard to deal with. I didn't know what to do with it. I knew how to light someone and make them look, kind of glamorous or interesting or shadowy. But suddenly in the real world with available light, I was like, what do you do with this stuff? And I did more and more documentary work. I was shooting a huge amount of handheld, and I very much fell in love with handheld. It took me back to my origins as a stills photographer, where you've always got a camera in your hand and you are exploring the world and finding frames within the world. So I found being kind of accidentally ending up in the world of documentaries, I fell in love with it. And I fell in love with the light that you see in the jungle in South America, or you see out, in the Arctic, where there's perpetual daylight and, the light looks amazing. So learning about documentary photography then fed back into my drama work. And I found that my approach in terms of what people might call drama has come full circle, in that now when I look at the work that I shoot in the drama world, I do the most minimal lighting possible. If I can light with one light, I will. Or if I can go with available light, I will. I tend to shoot a lot of handheld. And there's something very immersive and also fast about the way I work. I think it's very important, if you're working with actors, for example, that you don't bog everything down with endless bits of kit and relight and some bit of grip equipment. You take them out of a performance. If you can keep working fast, you keep people in that performative zone. So the fact that I shoot a lot of handheld on dialogue, for example, I love to shoot dialogue handheld, also adds to their performance because there's speed to it. So I'd say my work has come full circle from what I thought was drama-style cinematography to documentary, and now the two are sort of blended together in a way. There's also been a huge amount of tech, shift in tech. It was documentaries used to be shot on these sort of kind of tiny censored cameras. It was very ugly images that came out of them. And now, of course, the cameras that I would shoot a documentary on today are the exact same tools that I would choose to shoot a feature film tomorrow. I've been fortunate enough to work on some quite big documentary stuff. Like I did sort of Welcome to Earth, the big sort of Disney thing where I was fortunately working with Darren Aronofsky. And that's interesting as well, because he is a drama director working in the world of documentaries. But the commonality that we had is we had the tools he was used to. I had all the same prime lenses that I might use on a drama or a commercial, had, the same large format cameras that we would use. We had Steadicams, we had gimbals. So there's also been a maybe democratization in a way of these two poles, which used to be documentaries and dramas, that I think the money has flowed into documentaries because of the big streamers, essentially. And I guess maybe money's flowed out of drama in lots of ways. But I think there's a meeting. I think now to be a cinematographer, certainly for me, I can equally work in both worlds with the same tools and the same teams and the same approach. And they used to be two quite separate things. More recently, the film and television industry has been kind of devastated by economics, essentially. The big streamers, post-COVID, there was this bubble of production and it was just money, crazy amounts of money flowing to documentaries. I was shooting feature-length docs, 3 million, 4 million. I did, Welcome to Earth, 70 million. These were unheard of amounts of money previously. So that all stopped. sort of a couple of years ago. There were sort of economic reasons for that, maybe overinflated investments in the whole sort of streaming concept. But what that has meant is, as a freelance DP like myself, the economic pressures are huge. I definitely did a year where I scraped through. I'm someone who has a mortgage, who has, all these responsibilities I need to earn as much as anyone does. I live in London, one of the world's most expensive cities, so you need to earn a certain amount. So you then balancing, what do I say yes to with what are the things I really want to do? I still shoot lots of short films for no money, or a music video for no money, or passion projects that I want to invest in. And I truly believe that as any filmmaker, you are, and probably as a photographer as well, you are defined by the work you say no to as much as the work you say yes to. If you keep shooting, just ugly daytime TV stuff, no disrespect to people who do that, but if what you really want to make is Blue Velvet, but all you're doing is Homes Under the Hammer, you're probably never going to get there. So saying no to stuff is really important to get you to the place where you want to be as a filmmaker. And in this climate, it's I think, particularly for a person starting out, I'm lucky enough I have a bit of a reputation. People know me and people call me in for good stuff. But I have found in the last year, I said yes to a couple of things that I would never have said yes to before. So my worry for younger people is exactly that. The economic pressure is going to make people say yes to all the wrong projects. So the economic pressures, we'd like to think they're separate from creative decisions, but they're not. They really can pull you into this quagmire of bad decisions. Together with a business partner of mine and creative colleague, I've got a small studio. We own lots of cameras, lenses, bits of grip, lighting, a lot of equipment actually. And there's kind of pros and cons with that. And if I start first of all with the positives, and there's a lot of positives, is I am constantly testing. I'm constantly able to take out a camera or a piece of grip equipment and do incredibly technical camera and lens tests, but it's not costing me anything. So it's almost like having a visual laboratory where I can develop and finesse. For example, so my business partner, Michael Lindsay, is, he's a director, he's a cinematographer in his own right. Very much him. We built a set of vintage lenses that began with his thinking. They were sort of Canon rangefinders from the 60s. And the process of building these lenses and owning them was both a technical challenge, how do you make things? And, we partnered up with TLS to make the lenses. But also for me creatively to then take those lenses that we developed only because I own a studio and I own all this equipment, that I then took into shooting a number of films on. And my facility and knowledge of that, because I tested these lenses from their inception, is, that paid tremendous creative dividends, that I had this equipment that we tested and honed and everything else. So those are the pros, is you've constantly, my facility with certain bits of gear is very, very high because I own it and I'm using it all the time. The cons of owning a lot of equipment, because I see a lot of particularly young filmmakers fall in the trap. I must have a camera, I must have this, I must have that, is it can also limit you, because if you think, well, I've got my camera and I will only say yes to jobs that are on this camera, you're never going to own all the stuff in the world. Someone may offer you a feature film tomorrow and they want to shoot on a film camera you don't own or some lenses you don't own. So I think if you have to be able to let go of the economics as well, because I think it could also hold your career back. I think it's fantastic owning equipment and you can make money out of it as well. But I think there's a trap in there, and I would caution sort of people starting out not to fall into that trap of, I've got this gear, I will only work on this gear, because that's really going to reduce your career down. It's more about relationships you make with people, saying yes to the right projects, choosing creative projects, which will often not be best on your camera with your lenses. There'll be other vintage anamorphic lenses that you don't own that are going to suit that project. So always let the project tell you what camera and lens choices you should make, what lights you should use. It should be driven by the script, not by economics. So we obviously live in an era where AI is generating huge amounts of visual content. And there are some tools that, I think are brilliant, like noise reduction tools, which use AI. I think there's some upscaling algorithms, and there are sort of paintbrushes, which I think are very interesting. I believe in the world of audio, people are able to clean up pretty scrappy audio and make it, beautiful by using AI. But that is different to generative AI, where you're actually making the programs themselves. So I work in the world of documentaries quite a lot. I mean, they tend to be these quite big budget documentaries, but nevertheless, I'm quite known for my work in the world of documentaries. And I have a major issue about AI being used in documentaries. If we really believe there is such a thing as a documentary, then if a film is a documentary, then it has to be in the world of truth, it has to be in the world of reality, or else it's not a documentary. Now, it's fair enough if you're just making factual entertainment, or maybe if you're making a commercial, or you just a feature film that is the product of your imagination, you could argue, well, let me just generate that because it's all imagined anyway. But if there is such a thing as documentaries, I think there is something politically dubious and philosophically dubious about generating these images. I think documentaries should be about real people in real spaces, recounting real moments of their lives, or being there with, these people as this real moment in their life unfolds. And I think the question that I've asked of lots of people because AI has begun to seep into the world of documentaries, I'm very opposed to it, is I often say to people, would you be happy if your news was AI generated? And the answer is always no. No one would be happy to watch the news and go, oh, none of this happened. And I want to take that message into the world of documentaries, where I do lots of my work, in that I think this is a key moment. These are not innocent ideas, truth, reality. These are very political ideas. And I think the use of AI in documentaries, now's the time to shout about that. I think a line needs to be drawn. And I think it's a difficult argument to make in the world of, say, feature films. And you're making another argument, which is about people's jobs, which is not an invalid argument. But I would say in the world of documentaries, you've got the same arguments about people losing their jobs, but you've got a much bigger argument, which is about truth and reality. And if you look at global politics at the moment, you will know that ideas of truth and reality are a battleground. I've been doing this for long enough. At the start of my career, I was shooting a lot of stuff on film, a lot of Super 16 music videos and stuff. And then there was this big revolution with video cameras, essentially, which mini DV was a big deal. And there were these cheap, affordable cameras, very difficult to make beautiful pictures on, like almost impossible. And then I think I'm living in this golden age of cinematography, because what happened in maybe the last decade was suddenly film cameras that were digital that could use lenses that had been around for 100 years. They took the same PL mount lenses, or whatever mount you went for, but PL was quite pervasive, that had been around forever. And I find it an extraordinary moment that I use a camera quite a lot, which is, say, 8K, and it has 16-bit color. It's shooting raw. I've got behind the lens, I've got these incredible sensors that can shoot in very, very low light. There's other cameras I use that are 12,800 ISO. I mean, that's back in my film days, I wouldn't have dreamt of that level of sensitivity. So I think the tools that are available now are absolutely remarkable. I think something as small as an FX3 with maybe some vintage lenses that someone's bought on eBay, you can end up with this tiny little camera and in some ways have better tools than, say, Gordon Willis used to shoot The Godfather on. You can shoot in lower levels of light, high resolution, probably even better color fidelity with, some stills lenses that were made in the 80s or 90s, which, are still outperforming some of the Baltar glass that Gordon Willis was using on The Godfather. So I think the tools and the facility to the tool with these tools, the democratization that's happened, like someone could go out and buy these little cameras with a small set of primes and just be able to shoot better results. You could go on the streets of London at night with a 1.4 lens shooting 12,000 ISO and just capture in ways that people never could. But I think it all comes back to storytelling and what is appropriate. So the tools have been an absolute revolution. Gimbals, there's incredible stabilization tools at the moment. I use the Ronin 4D quite a lot. I'm sure everyone's seen Adolescence that's just come out. The storytelling potential of a very stabilized rig, which is tiny, and you can just run around and everything is going to be smooth and Steadicam-like on this tiny device that you just pick up and run with. Some of the lighting tools are extraordinary. There's tiny little LED solutions that you could tuck into little bits and pieces. There's practical light bulbs that you can put in and dial in the colors. You can control everything from an iPhone. I just shot a drama a couple of weeks ago and the gaffer was on his phone the whole time, dialing in color temperatures. I would look at a monitor and go, let's go 4,000 Kelvin on that light. Let's go, 2,800 on these practicals. Just those choices were never there. And then the camera I'm shooting on is smaller, lighter, more sensitive. But nothing will compensate for storytelling and thinking. And I began this by talking about The Godfather, where they're shooting on these massive Panavision cameras, but everything's big and blimped, and they're shooting on 100 ISO film stocks. It's really hard. But you look at the film and it's extraordinary. And Gordon Willis has killed it with the photography. So I would ask young people, like, where are the Goddards of now? Where is someone shooting Breathless right now when we've got these affordable handheld tiny little cameras? Because it is still about storytelling. It is still about finding the appropriate photography, the appropriate performances, script for your film. So no amount of democratization of the tools or free availabilities will compensate for the ability to tell a beautiful story. So if I were to give some advice to young people starting out in a similar role to myself, I would say there's a lot of negativity around at the moment about jobs, economics. Is there a career potential for me? But I think if you want to make films, you know that you do. It's an overwhelming need to make films. So you almost don't have a choice. Once you've decided I want to be a filmmaker, if you don't feel that passion, don't be a filmmaker. If you're just doing it for a job, maybe it's not the right time to get into that as a job. But if it's a true passion for you and you love it, my next bit of advice would be just shoot stuff, just keep doing. No amount of study will compensate for making films. Make a film on your iPhone, make a film on a DSLR, make a single shot film. Look around you in your local neighborhood. There are stories everywhere. You don't need a big sci-fi epic with spaceships coming down to save humanity. There are stories. Robert Rauschenberg said, if you can't make art within your own city block, then you're not an artist. You should be able to, where you live, with people there will be stories. Maybe don't differentiate between documentary and drama. There will be documentary stories, people things you've seen, at empty fields. I think just keep making stuff. The more you make, the more mistakes you'll make, the more you will learn. Just keep making stuff.